The ruins were silent, except for the sound of wind moving through broken walls. The human traveler walked carefully, his boots crunching on the dust and scattered glass. He had seen many destroyed colonies before, but this one felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, like something still lingered. He thought he was alone until he heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft for human ears. It was a cry, weak and trembling, coming from the shadows. He stopped, his heart racing. He listened again, and the sound came once more, a small sob of someone who had been crying for a long time. He moved toward the sound slowly, his hand near the old weapon on his belt. In a corner of the ruined hall, half hidden under fallen metal sheets, he saw her. She was small, thin, and covered in dirt. Her skin was pale, with faint marks that showed she was not human. Her big eyes shone in the dim light, wet with tears, and her shoulders shook as she tried to stay quiet. She looked no older than a child, though her alien features made it hard to know her true age. Her clothes were torn, and her hands clutched her knees tightly, as if the world might break her apart at any moment. The human knelt down, careful not to scare her. She flinched when his shadow touched her, her eyes wide like a cornered animal. For a moment, he thought she might run, but she was too weak to move. He spoke softly, telling her he meant no harm. She only shook her head, whispering words in broken human language. "Go away, please. They will come back." Her voice cracked like glass, and her tears fell freely again. The human felt something twist inside his chest. He had seen soldiers, rebels, raiders, and even alien warriors in battlefields. But this was only a girl left to suffer alone. He took a slow breath and asked her name. But she did not answer. She just kept crying, repeating the same words, "Go away." Finally, after a long silence, she whispered something different. "I never had a birthday." Her voice was almost too soft to hear, but he caught the words. He frowned, confused. Of all the things she could say, why this? He leaned closer, and she repeated it, this time with her eyes lifted to his face. Never had a birthday. Not one." She sobbed again, pressing her face into her knees as if ashamed to admit it. The human felt a strange ache in his heart. He remembered his own childhood, the candles, the laughter, the simple joy of being remembered. And here was a girl who had never once been celebrated, never once felt wanted enough to be given a day of her own. He realized she was not just abandoned, she had been forgotten even by those who should have loved her. The thought made his hands tighten into fists. He could not leave her here. Not after hearing that. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small water flask. He held it out, and after a long hesitation, she took it with shaking hands. She drank greedily, the water spilling down her chin, and then looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Why?" she asked softly, as if she could not understand why a stranger would help her. He smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "Because no one should cry alone," he said. His voice was steady, but inside he was shaken. She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, "Please, don't leave." The human froze at her words. He had not planned to stay. He was only passing through, searching for supplies and a safe path forward. But looking at her fragile figure, he knew if he walked away, she would not survive the night. Her breaths were shallow, her arms thin as sticks. She was more ghost than living being. He sighed, rubbing his face, knowing his journey had just changed. He told her he would not leave. Not tonight. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time, and she let out a long breath as if releasing years of fear in one moment. The night grew colder, and he made a small fire from broken wood and scraps. She sat close, her eyes fixed on the flames, her face glowing softly in the light. For the first time, she looked less like a shadow and more like a child who belonged to the world. She began to speak in short, broken sentences, telling him pieces of her life. She said her family had left her behind when the raiders came. She said she was told she was useless, too weak to work, too small to fight. She said no one ever remembered her name, not even on the day she was born. Each word was like a knife in his heart. He listened without interrupting, his fists clenched tightly on his knees. She finished her story with silence, her eyes reflecting the fire. Then she whispered again, "I never had a birthday." This time, her words did not sound like a simple fact. They sounded like a wound that had never healed. He looked at her, and without thinking, he made a promise. "You will have one," he said. She blinked at him in surprise, as if she thought she had misheard. He nodded firmly. I don't know how, but I will give you one. A real birthday. Her lips trembled, and then she gave a tiny smile. It was weak, uncertain, but it was real. That small smile made him feel as if he had won a great battle. For her, it was more than just a promise of a celebration. It was a promise that she was not forgotten anymore. The ruins outside were still dangerous, the shadows still filled with threats, but for a moment, inside that broken hall, there was warmth. She leaned closer to the fire, her eyes finally closing in sleep, while he kept watch, his hand on his weapon. He had no idea how he would keep his promise, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not let her cry alone again. The morning light entered through the cracks of the broken walls, painting long lines across the dusty floor. The human stretched his tired arms, his eyes still on the small figure sleeping near the burned-out fire. She had curled up like a child, her thin hands holding her knees even in her dreams. For a moment, he wondered how long it had been since she last slept without fear. He rubbed his face, then sighed. He had promised her something he wasn't sure he could give. A birthday, a day she had never known. His heart felt heavy because he had nothing. No cake, no gifts, no decorations. Only his word. The girl woke slowly, blinking against the light. When she saw him still there, she sat up quickly, as if afraid he might have gone. But when her eyes confirmed his presence, her shoulders relaxed, and she let out a small breath of relief. You stayed, she whispered, her voice soft but filled with something new, trust. He nodded, handing her a small piece of dried food from his pack. She ate it carefully, almost reverently, as though even this small act was rare kindness. After a while, she looked at him with eyes that still carried the shadows of loneliness. Did you mean it? She asked. He frowned. Mean what? She hugged her knees tighter and whispered, the birthday. He felt her question cut deep into him. He had spoken the words in the heat of the moment, but now, looking at her hopeful eyes, he knew he couldn't take them back. He forced a smile and said firmly, yes, you will have a birthday. Her lips parted as if she wanted to believe but was too afraid. But no one ever cared before. Why now? She asked. His answer came without hesitation. Because you deserve one. Her eyes glistened, and she lowered her head, her thin shoulders trembling, not from fear this time, but from the weight of emotions she had never felt before. She began to ask questions. What happens on a birthday? What do humans do? He told her about candles, cakes, songs, and gifts. She listened with wide eyes, as though he spoke of a strange kind of magic. Her tears returned, but this time they were mixed with laughter. I never knew such things existed, she said softly, her voice almost breaking. I thought birthdays were only in stories for other people. He shook his head. They are for you too now. That day, he searched the ruins for anything useful. The girl followed him, her steps light but cautious. She was still weak, and he often slowed his pace so she could keep up. They found scraps of cloth tangled in rubble, pieces of broken glass that reflected light like jewels, and small metal parts from abandoned machines. He pocketed them, already thinking of how he could turn these fragments into something special. The girl held up a torn ribbon she discovered under a pile of dirt. Pretty? She asked shyly. He smiled. Yes, very pretty. We'll use it. She hugged the ribbon to her chest as though it was already a treasure. When they rested, he told her more stories of birthdays. How children on Earth would run and play, how friends would gather, how laughter filled the air. She closed her eyes, picturing it all, her lips forming a fragile smile. Can I really have that? She asked once more, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. He touched her shoulder gently. You will, I promise. She clung to his sleeve, refusing to let go, as if afraid he might vanish if she loosened her grip. As night fell, he looked at the small pile of scraps they had gathered. It was almost nothing, yet he tried to imagine them as decorations, as something more. The girl watched him closely, her eyes shining with curiosity. You work so hard, she whispered. He chuckled softly. I don't even know how to make a cake with what we have, he admitted. Her face fell, and for a second, he feared her hope would break. But then she shook her head and said, It doesn't matter. I only want you to stay. Her words struck him harder than any weapon. He realized she didn't truly care about cake or gifts. What mattered to her was that someone remembered, someone cared enough to try. That night, she sat by the fire again, her small hands playing with the ribbon she had found. She spoke about her past, little pieces at a time. She had once asked her mother why she never had a birthday. Her mother had looked at her with cold eyes and said, "You are nothing worth celebrating." Those words had followed her like chains, carving wounds into her heart. When she repeated them to the human, his chest burned with anger. He clenched his fists and swore silently that he would erase those words with new ones. As she finished speaking, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the broken colony streets. The human froze, his hand going to his weapon. He signaled her to stay quiet, and she instantly obeyed, her eyes wide with fear. The noise passed after a while, fading into silence, but he knew what it meant. Raiders still roamed nearby. They could not stay hidden forever. The girl whispered, "They will come back. They always come back." He looked at her trembling hands clutching the ribbon, and then at the scraps they had collected. He realized their time was short. If he wanted to keep his promise, he had to act fast. She leaned against him as the fire burned low, her voice soft. "Even if it is only one day, even if it is small, I want to know what it feels like. Just once." He looked down at her fragile figure pressed against his side, and nodded silently. His heart carried a weight heavier than any battle he had fought before. He wasn't just fighting raiders or hunger now. He was fighting to give her something no one else ever had, the feeling of being wanted. As she drifted into sleep, still holding the ribbon tightly, he stared into the flames. His mind raced, planning how to make the impossible happen. He had no cake, no gifts, no decorations, but he had determination. And in that moment, he swore to himself that before the raiders returned, before the darkness swallowed them again, he would give her the first birthday she had ever known. The human knew he could not make a real birthday with only scraps. A ribbon, broken glass, and burned wood were not enough. She deserved more. The promise he had given her echoed in his mind again and again, pushing him to do something dangerous. That night, while the girl slept, curled up with the ribbon pressed against her chest, he looked at the dark sky through the ruined roof and made his decision. He would go to the raiders' camp. He had seen their fires from a distance before. They had food, tools, and maybe something he could turn into a gift. It was madness to even think of stealing from them, but he could not break his promise. He whispered to the sleeping girl that he would return soon. She stirred but did not wake. For a moment he hesitated. What if he never came back? What if she woke up and found herself alone again? The thought nearly broke his courage, but then he remembered the way her voice had trembled when she said, "I never had a birthday." That was enough. He tightened his grip on the small blade at his side and slipped into the shadows. The night was cold, and every sound felt too loud. The crunch of his boots on the dirt, the rustle of the wind against metal sheets. It all seemed like it would give him away. He moved low and careful, his eyes scanning the ruins until the faint glow of fire came into view. The raiders' camp was at the edge of the colony, surrounded by piles of stolen goods. He crouched behind broken walls, watching. There were 5 of them, rough figures with hard voices, laughing and drinking around the fire. Weapons glimmered at their sides, sharp and deadly. His heart pounded. He knew if they caught him, there would be no mercy. He waited until their laughter grew louder, their attention fixed on the bottles they passed around. Then he moved. Quiet as he could, he slipped into the edge of their camp. His hands shook as he picked through piles of supplies. He found food, strange alien fruits with glowing skins, dried meat strips, and something wrapped in silver foil that smelled sweet. He took what he could fit into his bag. His eyes caught on a small box decorated with bright colors, probably stolen from another family long ago. It looked like it had once been a toy or maybe even a party decoration. His chest tightened. This was perfect. He grabbed it, holding it like treasure. Just as he turned to leave, one of the raiders shifted, standing up to throw wood onto the fire. The human froze, his breath trapped in his throat. The raider's eyes scanned the camp lazily, then turned back to the others. The human slipped back into the shadows, moving as quickly and silently as he dared. Every step felt like a mile. His heart thundered so loudly he was sure they would hear it. Finally, he reached the safety of the ruins. He crouched there, gasping quietly, his body trembling with both fear and relief. He had done it. He had stolen something that might make her smile. When he returned to their hiding place, the girl was awake, sitting near the ashes of the fire with wide, fearful eyes. She jumped to her feet when she saw him. "You came back," she whispered, her voice breaking with relief. He nodded, opening his bag. He placed the glowing fruits and the wrapped sweet on the ground before her. Her eyes widened, her small hands covering her mouth. "For me?" she asked. He nodded again, smiling faintly. She touched the fruits like they were precious gems, her eyes filled with tears. "No one ever brought me anything," she said, her voice shaking. "Never. Not once." He pulled out the small, colorful box and handed it to her. She took it carefully, almost afraid it might vanish. When she opened it, she found tiny pieces of shiny string and faded paper decorations inside. Her lips trembled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. She clutched the box to her chest and cried, not with the hopeless, broken sobs he had heard before, but with something new. These were tears of disbelief, of fragile joy. She laughed through her tears, shaking her head as if she could not believe someone had done this for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's mine?" He sat down beside her, watching her face light up in a way he had never seen. The girl looked at him as though he had given her the whole galaxy. "Why do this?" she asked softly. He answered with the truth. "Because I promised you a birthday, and I don't break promises." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes wide and glistening. Then suddenly she leaned forward and hugged him. Her thin arms were weak, but the force of her emotion was strong. He froze, surprised, then slowly placed his hand on her back. She was shaking, but not from fear anymore. From hope. They ate the food together. She laughed when the glowing fruit left a faint shine on her lips and fingers. She tried the sweet wrapped in foil and gasped at the taste, her eyes sparkling like a child's. Every sound of her laughter made him forget the danger he had faced only hours before. It was worth it. Every risk, every step into the Raiders' camp, it was all worth it just to see her smile like this. But as the night grew quiet again, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not safe. The Raiders would notice their missing supplies. They would search. His eyes kept scanning the darkness, his hand resting on his weapon. The girl noticed his tension and whispered, "They will come, won't they?" He looked at her and nodded honestly. "Yes, but I will not let them take you." Her lips trembled, but she nodded, holding the ribbon and the box close to her chest. For the first time, she believed someone might actually protect her. The fire burned low, and she leaned against his shoulder, still clutching the colorful box like it was her heart. She whispered in a tired voice, "This feels like a birthday already." He looked down at her, her eyes heavy with sleep, and smiled. "It's only the beginning," he said softly. As she drifted into dreams, he kept his eyes on the shadows beyond the ruins, knowing the real danger was coming closer. But for now, he let himself take comfort in her fragile joy, and in the knowledge that he had kept his promise, at least for tonight. The human did not sleep that night. He sat near the weak fire, sharpening a broken piece of metal into a knife, his eyes watching the shadows. The girl slept curled beside the colorful box and ribbon, holding them as if they were more valuable than gold. Each time she moved in her sleep, a small smile flickered on her lips. That smile gave him strength, but it also made him restless. He had promised her a birthday, and tomorrow had to be that day. He did not know if they would survive another raid, but if she was to have one good memory, it had to be now. When the morning came, the girl woke to find him already working. He had gathered scraps of cloth and broken strings from the ruins and was tying them into makeshift decorations. She blinked at him in confusion. "What are you doing?" she asked, rubbing her sleepy eyes. He smiled faintly. "Preparing your birthday." Her lips parted, and her eyes widened with disbelief. "But it's not real. It's only scraps." He shook his head firmly. "It's real because I say it is. It's real because it's yours." She stared at him for a long moment, then lowered her gaze to hide the tears forming in her eyes. They spent the day working together. He asked her to help, and she followed every instruction carefully. She tied strips of cloth to bent pieces of metal, hanging them around the broken hall like banners. She giggled when one piece slipped and hit her face, the sound of her laughter echoing strangely in the ruined walls. For the first time, her voice carried joy, not fear. He showed her how to cut pieces of the glowing fruit into small shapes, placing them on a flat rock like sweets on a tray. She clapped her hands softly, amazed at how the simple pieces looked when arranged neatly. As the hours passed, the ruins began to change. It was still broken, still cold, but the decorations gave it life. The girl stepped back and stared with wide eyes. "It looks different," she whispered. He nodded. "That's the magic of a birthday. Even broken places can feel alive." She looked at him with a trembling smile, as if she wanted to believe the world could really change that easily. But behind her joy, his mind was full of worry. He had seen signs of movement near the colony edge earlier. The raiders would soon notice the missing supplies. He had only hours before they returned. His hand kept brushing against the handle of his weapon as he worked, his eyes always flicking to the doorway. Yet each time he saw her laugh or smile, he forced himself to continue. This was her day. Nothing else mattered. As the sun began to sink, he worked on the most difficult part: the cake. He had nothing like flour or sugar, but he crushed the dried meat strips and mixed them with the glowing fruit pulp, pressing them together into a rough shape. It smelled strange but sweet. He placed it on a broken plate and looked at it critically. It was not a cake, it was barely food. But when he saw the girl's eyes light up, he no longer cared. "Is this for me?" she asked softly, her hands trembling as she pointed at it. He nodded. "Yes, your birthday cake." Her eyes filled with tears again, and she covered her mouth with both hands. No one ever made anything just for me." She took a step closer, and then another, staring at the rough cake as if it were a treasure from another world. She reached out but stopped herself, afraid she might ruin it. He gently placed her hand on it. "It's yours," he said firmly. "Touch it, eat it, smile, because it belongs to you." She laughed nervously, the sound shaky but real, and finally let her fingers press into the rough cake. "It's perfect," she whispered. Her tears ran freely, but this time they were mixed with a kind of happiness she had never known before. He felt his chest tighten. He had fought battles, faced enemies, seen blood and fire, but nothing had ever felt as important as this moment. As night approached, he took one final step. From a small piece of metal, he shaped a thin stick, then placed a drop of burning cloth on top. A weak flame flickered, swaying in the dark. He placed it on the cake, and the girl gasped. "It's like the light you spoke about. The candle?" He nodded. "Yes, now make a wish." She closed her eyes tightly, her thin hands clasped in front of her chest. She whispered words too soft to hear, then blew gently on the flame. The small fire vanished, leaving only smoke. She opened her eyes and laughed, a sound so pure it filled the ruined hall like music. She clapped her hands and whispered, "I wished for this moment to never end." But the moment was fragile. The sound of boots and harsh voices echoed faintly from outside the ruins. The human froze, his hand reaching for his weapon. The raiders were searching, their voices angry and growing louder. He turned to the girl, who had gone pale, clutching the ribbon in her hand. "They're coming," she whispered in terror. He nodded grimly. "Yes, but I will not let them take this from you." He moved quickly, hiding the decorations behind fallen stones and pushing the cake deeper into the shadows. She grabbed his sleeve, tears returning to her eyes. "Please, don't let them ruin it." He looked into her trembling face and gave her a fierce smile. "They won't. Not while I'm here." The footsteps drew closer, the shadows of raiders stretching across the broken walls. The girl pressed herself against him, shaking like a leaf. But even as fear tightened around his heart, he stood tall, ready to fight. Behind him, the flicker of the burned candle smoke still lingered in the air. For her, it was not just smoke. It was proof that she had a birthday at last. As the raiders closed in, the human gripped his weapon tighter. He knew the next hours would decide everything. He had given her a taste of joy, but to protect it, he would have to face blood and danger. He looked back at her once more, her eyes wide but shining with trust. That trust gave him strength. Whatever happened, he would make sure her first birthday was never forgotten. The raiders' voices grew louder outside the broken hall. Their boots struck the ground hard, their laughter turning into sharp commands. The human tightened his grip on the weapon in his hand, his eyes never leaving the doorway. The girl crouched low, clutching the ribbon in her trembling hands, her wide eyes filled with fear. She whispered, "They will destroy everything." He looked at her and shook his head firmly. "Not tonight. Tonight is your birthday." The sound of heavy steps drew nearer until shadows fell across the ruined entrance. The human stood tall, his body tense, ready to fight if needed. But then, something in his heart told him he couldn't let her lose this night to blood and violence. He turned to her quickly and whispered, "No matter what happens, remember this. This is your day. Nothing can take it away." She swallowed hard and nodded, though her body still shook. He moved toward the small cake he had made earlier, lighting the weak flame once again. The flicker glowed softly in the dark, casting light over the rough decorations. The girl gasped, her fear momentarily pushed aside by wonder. "You lit it again?" she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Because it's time." He motioned for her to sit in front of the cake. She obeyed slowly, her eyes fixed on the tiny flame. He began to sing softly, his rough voice carrying the melody of an earth song. She didn't understand the words, but the warmth in his voice made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. For the first time in her life, someone was singing for her. Tears welled in her eyes as she pressed her hands together, staring at the small light. "Make another wish," he said softly. She hesitated, then closed her eyes tightly. Her lips moved silently as she whispered her secret dream. When she blew gently, the flame vanished into smoke, curling up into the broken ceiling. She opened her eyes and laughed, her face glowing with joy. "I wished to never be alone again," she admitted, her cheeks wet with tears. The human felt his throat tighten. He wanted to promise her that she would never be abandoned again, but before he could speak, a crash echoed from outside. The raiders had kicked through a wall, their angry shouts cutting through the moment. The girl gasped and clutched his sleeve, panic rushing back into her eyes. He placed himself between her and the noise, his voice steady. "Stay behind me." The first raider stepped into the ruined hall, his weapon raised, his eyes scanning the strange decorations. He sneered when he saw the scraps of cloth hanging like banners. "What's this?" he laughed harshly. "A party?" More raiders entered, their boots crunching over the dirt and rubble. One of them spotted the small cake in the shadows and smirked. "Look at this. What kind of fool makes food like this when they should be hiding?" The girl whimpered, pressing her face against the human's back. He felt her shaking and whispered quickly to calm her. "Don't be afraid. It's still your birthday." He then stepped forward, raising his weapon. The raiders laughed at him. "A lone human? Do you think you can fight us all?" But the human did not move back. He stood firm, his eyes burning with determination. "I don't care about fighting you," he said in a low, steady voice. "But you won't touch her. Not her, and not this day." His words made the raiders pause for a moment. They looked at each other, surprised by his defiance. Then, with mocking laughter, one of them lunged forward. The human moved fast, striking with his blade and forcing the raider back. The others shouted in anger, rushing at him, but he fought like a man possessed. Every strike, every block, every movement came from something deeper than survival. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the smile he had seen on the girl's face only moments ago. He was fighting for her laughter, her tears of joy, her whispered wish not to be alone. The girl crouched in the corner, clutching the ribbon tightly, her eyes wide with terror, but also with something else, belief. She had seen people abandon her, mock her, hurt her. But now she was watching someone fight with everything he had just to protect her. Her heart raced as she whispered again and again, "Please don't die! Please don't die!" The fight raged across the ruined hall. The raiders knocked over the decorations, tearing down the cloth banners, crushing the glowing fruit into the dirt. The girl cried out when one of the strings snapped and fell to the ground. "No!" she sobbed, feeling her birthday crumble before her eyes. But then she saw the human, blood on his arm, still standing tall, still fighting with fierce strength. Her tears slowed as she realized something important. The cake could burn, the banners could fall, but the birthday was not gone. It was alive in the man who refused to let anyone take it away from her. With a roar, the human struck down another raider, his blade flashing in the firelight. The others hesitated, suddenly unsure. This was not a weak man. This was someone willing to die before giving up. "Get out!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the broken walls. "This place is not yours." The raiders snarled but backed away, dragging their injured companions. They muttered curses as they left, their shadows fading into the night. Silence fell at last. The human stood panting, blood dripping from a cut on his face. His chest rose and fell heavily, his weapon still ready, but the danger was gone. The girl ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She threw her thin arms around him, holding on as tightly as she could. "You didn't let them take it," she sobbed. "You saved it? You saved my birthday." He dropped the weapon and knelt to her level, wrapping his arms around her fragile frame. "I told you," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Nothing was going to take this day from you." She pressed her face into his chest, crying with relief and joy all at once. The broken decorations lay scattered, the small cake was half ruined, but in her heart, the memory was whole. That night, as the fire burned low, she sat beside him with her head resting against his shoulder. Her eyes were still red from crying, but her lips carried a faint smile. "This was the best day of my life," she whispered. He looked down at her, his own eyes heavy with fatigue, and answered softly, "It won't be the last." She closed her eyes, clutching the ribbon in her hand, and for the first time in her life, she truly believed him. The ruins were quiet after the raiders left, but the silence felt heavy. The human sat on the cold floor, his body aching, blood still dripping from cuts across his arms and face. His breathing was rough, every muscle screaming with pain. But when he looked at the girl, sitting beside him with the ribbon clutched to her chest and a small smile on her lips, the pain seemed distant. He had fought for that smile. He had bled for it, and it was worth everything. The girl leaned closer to him, her small hands trembling as she tried to wipe the blood from his cheek with a piece of cloth. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice shaking. He chuckled weakly. "I've been hurt before." But when he saw the tears welling in her eyes, his smile faded. She wasn't just scared of the raiders. She was terrified of losing him. "You can't leave me," she whispered suddenly, her voice breaking. "If you die, then I'll be alone again." The words struck him like a blade. He wanted to tell her he would never die, but he could not lie. Instead, he placed his rough hand gently over her small fingers. "I will fight as long as I can. I will fight so you never have to be alone again." Her lips trembled, and she pressed her forehead against his arm. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice almost desperate. He looked at her for a long moment. The answer came softly but firmly. "Because someone should have cared long ago, and if no one else did, then it has to be me." The girl's tears spilled over, and she began to cry openly. Not the empty, broken sobs he had heard before, but a raw, emotional flood that came from deep inside. "No one ever stayed," she wept. "No one ever fought for me. Not my family, not my people. They all left me because I was weak." Her small body shook as she cried into his arm. He listened quietly, his chest tight with anger and sorrow. He wanted to tell her she wasn't weak, that she was worth more than the entire colony that had abandoned her. Finally, when her tears slowed, he tilted her chin up gently so she would look at him. "Listen to me," he said in a steady, firm voice. "You are not weak. You survived when others would have given up. You are here because you are strong, and I don't care what anyone told you. You are worth protecting." Her wide eyes searched his face, desperate to believe his words. "But what if they come back?" she whispered. He glanced at the broken decorations, the half-ruined cake, and then back at her. "Then I'll fight them again, and if I fall, I'll fall knowing I gave everything to keep you safe. That's my promise." She stared at him, her lips parting in shock. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever promised to protect her no matter what. Slowly, she placed her small hand over his heart, feeling the heavy beat beneath his skin. "You're not lying?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, not lying." The firelight flickered across the ruined hall, throwing long shadows on the walls. Outside, the night was still dangerous, but inside there was a warmth growing stronger than the cold. The girl leaned closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I don't want this night to end," she whispered. He placed his arm gently around her shoulders, holding her close. "Then we'll make it last," he said. They sat together in silence for a long time, the crackling of the fire filling the emptiness around them. But soon his body reminded him of the battle. His wounds burned, and his arms grew heavy. The girl noticed and frowned, panic flashing in her eyes. "You're losing too much blood," she said quickly, trying to press the cloth harder against his cut. He winced, but didn't push her away. Her small hands worked frantically, desperate to stop the bleeding. I can't let you die, she whispered again and again. Not after everything. Her determination gave him strength to stay awake. He guided her hands gently, teaching her how to tie the cloth tighter to slow the bleeding. Good, he whispered, his voice weak but steady. You're helping me more than you know. She looked up at him with wide eyes. Really? He nodded. Yes, you're saving me. Hearing those words seemed to change something in her. She sat up straighter, her fear giving way to resolve. Then I'll stay awake all night, she said firmly. I'll watch over you the way you watched over me. He smiled faintly, pride warming his chest despite the pain. Then I'm safe, he whispered. As the night dragged on, the girl kept her promise. She checked his bandages again and again, fetched water from a cracked pipe nearby, and whispered softly whenever he began to drift towards sleep. Stay with me, she begged. Please don't go where I can't follow. Each time, he forced his eyes open and answered, I'm still here. At one point, she began to hum softly, her voice trembling at first, then growing steadier. It wasn't a song he knew, but it was her way of giving him comfort. He closed his eyes and listened, feeling the strange peace her fragile song carried. But outside, danger still lingered. The raiders had been beaten back, but they would not forget their stolen supplies. Somewhere in the darkness, they were planning, waiting. The human knew this. Yet as he listened to the girl's trembling voice, he allowed himself to believe that maybe they had won a small victory. When dawn finally painted the sky, the girl was still awake, though her eyes were red with exhaustion. She smiled weakly when she saw his eyes open. You made it, she whispered. He reached out and touched her hand, his voice low but steady. We made it. Together. The girl's smile widened, though her tears returned. You fought for me, she said, her voice breaking. And now, I want to fight for you too. The human stared at her, his chest heavy with emotion. He realized then that she had changed. She was no longer just a forgotten child waiting to be abandoned. She had found something new inside herself, strength born from his sacrifice. As the morning light filled the ruins, she sat proudly beside him, holding his hand tightly. The birthday decorations were torn, the cake half ruined, and blood still stained the floor. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the bond between them. A promise had been made, and now, no matter what came next, they were no longer alone. The morning air was cool, and the ruins looked less frightening under the pale light of dawn. The human rose slowly, his body sore and stiff from the wounds he had taken the night before. Every movement burned, but he did not complain. The girl was still beside him, her small hand holding his tightly as if she feared letting go would make him disappear. When he shifted, her eyes opened at once, tired but alert. She smiled faintly. You didn't leave. He shook his head. I told you I wouldn't. His voice was rough from exhaustion, but his words were firm. She sat up, brushing dust from her torn clothes. For a moment, she looked around at the broken decorations and the ruined hall. The banners were shredded, the glowing fruits were crushed, and the cake was half trampled from the fight. Yet when her eyes returned to him, her smile stayed. It's still my birthday, she whispered, as if daring the world to deny it. He felt pride swell inside his chest. Even after everything, she held on to joy. He stood slowly, wincing from the pain, and helped her to her feet. She clung to his hand, her body trembling with weakness, but her spirit stronger than the night before. Together, they stepped out of the hall into the broken streets of the colony. The world outside was quiet but dangerous. The raiders had not returned yet, but he knew they would not give up so easily. Their supplies had been stolen, their pride wounded, and men had been injured. They would come back with more fury, more weapons. He looked at the girl and thought of her wish to never be alone again. He could not let her stay in this dead place where enemies circled like wolves. She needed more than scraps of cloth and ruined walls. She needed safety, warmth, a real home. They walked carefully through the colony, scavenging what little they could. He found a cracked bottle to carry water, some dried roots, and pieces of metal he could shape into tools later. The girl gathered small shiny stones and broken glass, her eyes lighting up as if they were treasures. When he asked why she picked them up, she held them close to her chest and whispered, "To remember." He realized then that she was holding on to every piece of this memory, even the broken ones. For her, it wasn't just survival. It was proof that someone had given her something worth keeping. As the day wore on, They left the ruins behind. The human led her along a path that wound through the empty fields outside the colony. The sky stretched wide above them, blue and endless. The girl walked close to him, sometimes stumbling, but he always caught her before she fell. Each time, she looked up at him with eyes full of trust. "I never thought anyone would hold my hand," she admitted softly. He squeezed her fingers gently and replied, "Get used to it. I'm not letting go." Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. The human could feel his strength draining, his wounds slowing him down. But he forced himself to keep moving, because each step carried her further away from the pain of her past. He thought of the promise he had made that she would never be forgotten again, and he clung to it like a shield against his own weakness. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a small forest. The trees offered shade, and the air smelled fresher here. The girl gasped softly at the sight of green leaves and birds fluttering overhead. She had lived so long in ruins that the simple beauty of nature seemed like magic to her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He nodded. "It's safer here, too. We can rest." They found a small clearing, hidden among the trees. The human built a fire with dry branches, while the girl arranged her shiny stones in a circle around them. She sat proudly, showing him her work. "It looks like stars," she said with a smile. He chuckled softly. "Then tonight you'll sleep under two skies, one above and one you made." She laughed, and the sound filled the forest with warmth. When the fire was ready, he shared the last pieces of food he had taken from the raiders. They ate slowly, savoring each bite. The girl's face glowed in the firelight, her eyes reflecting both weariness and joy. After they finished, she leaned closer to him, her voice soft. "This is the best birthday anyone could ever have." He looked at her, surprised. "Even after everything? The raiders? The fight? The pain?" She nodded firmly. "Because you stayed. Because you made me feel like I matter. That's more than a cake. More than gifts." His chest tightened at her words. He had given her almost nothing. Scraps, stolen food, broken decorations. Yet she looked at him as if he had given her the world. He realized then that it wasn't the things that mattered. It was the promise. The fight. The fact that someone had chosen her when everyone else had turned away. As the night fell, the girl curled beside him near the fire. She rested her head on his arm, her voice drowsy but filled with peace. "Can I call you family?" she whispered shyly. His throat tightened, but he smiled and nodded. "Yes, family." She smiled and closed her eyes, drifting into sleep. The human stayed awake for a while longer, staring at the fire and the circle of stones glowing faintly around them. He thought of the battles he had fought, the lives he had seen lost, and the endless darkness of this world. And yet here, with one forgotten girl, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. He looked down at her sleeping face, the ribbon still tangled in her fingers, and whispered softly to himself, "You'll have more birthdays, as many as I can give you." His voice was steady, filled with determination. The forest was quiet, the fire warm, and the girl safe in his arms. For the first time, she would wake in the morning, not as an abandoned child, but as someone's family. And for the human, who had wandered so long through battles and ruins, this was his victory, the kind that no war could ever take away.